everyone. This is the last part of the step-by-step for the pie for one of two options for your second assignment for props. And I'm going to walk you through this now with some pictures like I have before. So where we left off last time was I had let this skin that I created for the pie, which was 1 part modeling paste, 1 part glue, and 1 part gesso. I let that dry for a couple of days. And so the next part is to start painting it. Of course, I'm making a lattice top pie, which means I need to paint the filling and the outer crust of the pie first, and then I'm going to be treating the lattice separately. So you'll notice that I've got in the first picture on the left my research up on my computer. I have my different paints to the side, and I'm starting to try to match along the side of the crust what I have on the research images. Now don't forget to also turn the pie to the side so that you get that little edge that's just above the pie pan. On the right hand side, you'll notice that I've also started thinking about what the inside of the pie filling looks like. I found a couple of pictures of open-faced apple pies so that I could see the filling. And I looked at the different colors, the yellows, the kind of caramelly color, the shadows in between the apples. And I started picking out those colors and basically blocking them in. I wasn't really concerned at this point about super amounts of detail because I know I'm going to be covering the whole thing with lattice. My main goal was to make sure I had the tones in there and that they were high enough contrast that when I got the lattice on that we could see some movement inside the pie. So moving on, I did end up bumping up the shadows between the edges of my apple pieces because I did notice that a couple of the images had just more of that kind of like caramelly darker tone. And then once I got it to this point, I set it to the side and decided to start on my lattice. I chose to make my lattice out of foam sheets, and so I had two 9-inch by 12-inch foam sheets that I got at Walmart. And I used my clear ruler to mark out 5/8 of an inch. Every 5/8 of an inch. You could also do 3/4 of an inch, but I thought 5/8 seemed to be the right size for what I was doing. And I know that I needed 12 strips. So I went ahead and marked out all of my strips and then cut them out carefully with my scissors. And the thinner foam was pretty easy to cut out nice and straight with just a sharp pair of scissors. Once I had my strips, I first laid in the first vertical and the first horizontal and wove the second piece in and glued them together. And then I kind of walked away at this point and let them dry a little bit because I figured if I had my vertical and my horizontal all glued down that my subsequent weaving in and out would be easier because I wouldn't be fighting the wet glue and everything would be sliding everywhere. So and that was just trial and error. I've never done this before, so I just figured out that it made more sense to just kind of give this a minute to dry. And then I started weaving in each piece of foam, so over, under, and then you alternate the next one over, under, and then under, over. So each alternating strip is the opposite of what you've just done to the previous one. So the first one is over, under, the second one is under, over, the next one would be over, under. So, okay, so I got them, you'll see here on the left-hand side, I got to the point where they were all glued and dried, and this is why it's taken me so long is because I was waiting for glue to dry on every step of this. So the next step was to start painting them, and I had to let this dry for a couple of hours. I had some leftover of the skin solution with the 1 part modeling paste, 1 part gesso, and 1 part glue, and I had saved it. It was already tinted from when I covered the pie. I had covered a little dish of it in plastic and then put it inside another plastic container. So I had that sitting on the shelf from this weekend, and I could take that out. I really, I put down paper towels under it, but I did kind of have to fight the fact that it wanted to stick to the paper towel. So you may want to work on like a plastic cutting board or something where you know it's not going to stick, that you can't peel it up. If I had let it, the paper towel would have stuck to it, and I would have had to peel paper towel off, and then I would have had little pieces of paper towel stuck to it. I just kept moving it around so that it wouldn't stick to my paper towel. But I think that there probably was a smarter way of doing that, and that probably would have been me getting my plastic cutting board, or even maybe a cookie sheet turned upside down, so that the underside of it, you can, scrub it and clean the paint off, because the paint comes up, it peels right off. But yeah, I think that those would be the two options that would be workable. In the left-hand shot on this one, you'll see that I've coated it really well with the solution that I had left over. The one thing I will tell you is that you have to get the edges. All of those little strips have all of those little tiny skinny edges, and if you don't get them now, trying to do that once it's already glued to the pie is not going to make you happy, because you'd have to go in with a tiny brush, and you have the possibility of it getting onto the painting that you did of your filling, and etc. So if you're going to do a lattice top, paint the whole lattice top separately from the pie. Don't try to do it as once it's attached. So I really spent time. I kept turning the whole thing around and around, leaning it up, using my light to see where I'd missed places. Corners and edges were like constant. And even after I'd finished the whole thing and I got it on my pie, there were places where there were corners and edges that I completely missed. So just take your time to do that part and you won't have frustration. So then I had to set the lattice to the side to let it dry. While that was drying, I went ahead and decided to go ahead and seal my pie in the filling and the edge, the crust. So I used a soft touch varnish. You could use a satin, whatever you like. Spread it evenly over the whole thing. And this is on the left-hand side. This is with the varnish on it. And then, of course, I had to let that dry as well. So over here on the right-hand side, I had laid, once it was all dry, I laid my lattice down on top of my pie. And what I did is I kind of used the inside edge of my pie crust as my guide to help me mark a light pencil line. And then when I went to cut it, I cut about 1/4 of an inch away from that pencil line, just to make sure I had some extra in case I needed to trim it, or I didn't want it too short. It's always better to have something too long than too short. So then I went ahead and laid my lattice. Of course, it's shown laid here on top of the pie, but I laid my lattice back on my paper towels, and I used my paint to try to match the color of the edge of the crust, at least with the base tones. I didn't worry about like the highlights and the lowlights, like the shadows. I just wanted to get some movement in the color, so I used some of the same tones I used in the crust, and laid it on the pie, on the paper towels. And then once it was done, I laid it on the pie just to see how it was fitting and everything. And then I had to let it dry. So that's the story of my life with this project. So then I flipped it upside down once it was dry enough, and I put a very kind of generous thin bead of glue along the edge of my lattice. So this is the underside of my lattice. You can see it here, it's white. And it's got the glue going along the edge. And then I glued it down. And here on the left-hand side, you can see the glue still drying. While I was letting it dry, I got all of my bag clips in my house. And I used my bag clips, all the potato chip bag clips and stuff like that. I clipped the whole thing down. And then I was thinking to myself, well, this was not the best product to use to glue this down. This would be the one time where you could use a nice thin bead of hot glue and be better off. So I would say if I were to do it again, I would, instead of using bag clips and trying to wait for this white glue to dry, I would just lay a very narrow bead of hot glue down, and then incrementally do parts as I go around. You're going to want to make sure you've centered your lattice on your pie, obviously. But I just think that choosing to do hot glue instead of white glue here would have been a big time saver for me, because at one point it just was not sticking, and so I was in my bathroom with my hair dryer trying to force dry with my hair dryer this white glue to get it to dry so that it would stick, and then I've got bag clips all. It was kind of a mess. So once that was done, you'll notice that there's these little white dots and little brown dots on top of the pie. And I really struggled with this because I wanted, this class is really about creating props for theater, and it's not for film. So, certainly if you're closer to the camera, you have to have things be much more fine and real looking. But the problem with doing that for theater is that it doesn't read from far away. So I decided to opt for somewhere in the middle, where I took the end of my paintbrush and I put some white, well, I had some like cream colored paint, and I dipped the end of my paintbrush in it and I made some dots on it. And I thought, well, from a distance, that might read as, those big crystals of sugar that sometimes you'll see on apple pie. They'll put the egg wash on the top of the pie, and then they'll put those big crystals of sugar, and then they'll bake the pie. And the crystals of sugar end up being kind of sparkly on the top. That was kind of what I was going for. But then they were kind of white, so I went back with my medium brown, and I did the same process on some of the larger dots of white. I went back in and did it, and it kind of reads as like a dusting of cinnamon. So in the final picture, you'll notice that all my glue is dried. I've got my little tableau set up with my different things around it, my apples and my pie server and all of that. It really does and I'm looking at it right now, sitting on my dining room table. I'm in the living room. It looks like a real apple pie from this far away. And now both Lee and I really want apple pie. So it was a lot of fun. It took several days, longer than I thought it would take, just simply from the drying. But you know what? It was a learning process. So I hope you enjoy this video, and let me know if you have any questions on Wednesday, and I'll talk to you then. Thanks so much.